This is the Legacy United Soundwave, which is a slight repaint of the Netflix Soundwave that was a Walmart exclusive a couple years ago. My last video was a review of a retool of a fairly old figure. Now I'm making a video about a repaint of a fairly new figure. Man, I'm sure the YouTube algorithm's just gonna love that.
No! 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 No!
Starting in the alt mode because I hate viewer retention, I think it's pretty solid overall. Now insert obligatory old outdated media format joke here. I think it looks pretty good. You know, from the front, I like all the little details like the right and left indicators on the sides, the buttons on the front. I even like that one of the pegs is turned into a record little LED light. And I really like the colors they chose here, the really dark blue with the light blue and the gold, silver. They complement each other really well. However, this illusion is kind of broken when you turn it on its side, or God forbid you look at its back. There's not really much else I can say other than it's pretty ugly, and even putting the batteries here doesn't really help that much. This figure actually does come with 3 different tapes, all of which can go inside of the tape deck. Getting back to the main figure, I would like to add that this figure is practically brand new straight out of the box, and it's already got some pretty bad paint chipping, and there's a bunch of little spots where the paint isn't the best. Nothing terrible, but for a brand new figure, especially at the price point this was being sold at, I'm a tad disappointed. Now for size comparison, first we have the Studio Series 86 Bumblebee. Then we have the War for Cybertron Siege Red Alert. Then we have the Studio Series Gamer Edition Optimus Prime. And then we have my last review, the Transformers Prime Dead End. Now moving on to the transformation. First thing we're going Soundwave has always had an extremely simple design all the way back to his very first version, but I think it's for that reason that it's held up so well. And as expected, that simple design works great here too. I love his big wide chest, and that arm cannon looks great. However, I think the one part that makes this figure stand above the rest is the head sculpt. I love how it looks, and it's painted really well, and the light piping on the top really helps his eyes pop. And unlike his alt mode, he actually looks pretty good from any angle. Moving on to his accessories, first we have his other battery that converts into what I always assumed was a laser gun, but upon remembering the original toy, this was actually a rocket launcher. It looks pretty good. Simple transformation, does the job well. And I don't know if these actually count, but if you look underneath of his arms, he's got little guns that you can just pop out. And actually, as far as I remember, these aren't covered in the instructions at all. And these are pretty much only here because of the original Walmart release. They look fine. Honestly, I think it kind of screws with the look of the arms more than they're worth. And that's it. He doesn't come with any other weapons. None at all. Alright, I'm gonna keep it frank. I completely forgot Soundwave came with this until I was done filming. If I'm being honest, I don't like it at all. It looks really cheap, doesn't fit Soundwave at all. And my best guess as to why this was included is I think it's actually supposed to be a little Megatron. And I guess this because back in G1, Megatron actually used to transform into a little gun that other Cybertronians could use. And not only that, you can unfold it to have Soundwave do his best Megatron cosplay. I believe you're actually supposed to do this with the Megatron that came from the Netflix line, but I don't have that figure, so I don't know for a fact. Now getting to what unfortunately I think is the most disappointing thing about this figure, its posability. First, we have a ball joint at the head that allows him to do a full 360, and it allows him to look up decently far and down practically not at all. And he also gets a half decent head tilt. On his shoulder cannon, we get a swivel that's only impeded by his head. He can do a full 360 at his shoulder, as well as extend it. He also has a bicep swivel. And here at the arm, we get to possibly one of the most annoying things about his posability. When you get about a 45-degree angle, it just wants to stop. And it either wants to snap in right here at 45 degrees or down to his shoulders. It's almost like a ratchet joint, but not quite. And if you're just careful enough, you can work around it, but it's extremely annoying. We also get a double jointed elbow. And at his hand, we get a slight wrist.
Dads, the second you see your son dropping the limp wrist, you walk over there and crack that wrist.
That's more for the transformation. And at his waist, we get a full 360. And the front skirt is actually split into two parts, so you can move each part individually. You can move the butt flap back here. You get a halfway decent kick. Leg moves back so far. And you get a really good spread, actually. And we get a slightly below 90-degree bend at the knee. And we have pretty much nothing at the ankle except a slight pivot. His posability is fine, but nothing to write home about, unfortunately. It's definitely the weakest part of this whole figure. He looks really good from afar, but actually messing with him is more of a chore than anything. For size comparisons, yet again we have Bumblebee, Red Alert, Optimus Prime, and Dead End. And speaking of Dead End, clearly when I was making my last video I was drinking my dumb hoe juice because I didn't find out until after I was done recording that there's actually another way to store the swords on him. In my review I said pretty much the only way to store the swords in robot mode were on his shoulders, but something I didn't realize is that these little holes on his back are actually meant for his swords, so you can more accurately replicate his look from the show. Not a huge detail, but something I wanted to mention. If it's a fairly meh figure overall, then why is it being sold anywhere from $50 all the way up to $200? God damn! Well, if we look at his hands, you'll notice one of them is actually molded to do more of a pressing action. And if we use said hand to press his button enough, we get our answer. Yippee! It's his cassettes are why he costs so much. For what's obvious for anyone that's privy to Soundwave, each cassette is its own individual transformer. Now, because all three start as over-glorified rectangles, I'm actually going to cover all three in cassette mode at the same time. Starting with Ravage, he looks really good considering he's the only one out of the three to have printed text on him. However, I would dare say he probably feels the worst out of the three because, unlike the other two, he just doesn't really snap together real satisfying, so the tape mode leaves a lot to be desired. Next would be Buzzsaw. Although he's probably got the least going for him in cassette mode compared to the other two, his bright red and yellow contrast really help him stand out from the other two, but unfortunately other than that there's not really much else to add. And last but not least is Rumble, and hands down he's my favorite cassette out of the three, both in cassette mode and in robot mode, minor spoiler. When it comes to the looks, first off, he's the only one that actually has molded detail to make him look more like a cassette, and the other thing he has hands down compared to the other two cassettes is that he feels the most solid out of the three, and not only that, he actually looks the best from any angle. Here are the size comparisons. Bumblebee, Red Alert, Optimus Prime, Dead End. Now moving on to the transformations, first is Ravage. Buzzsaw, Rumble, Now back to Ravage. As much shit as I was giving the tape mode, I gotta admit I really like the little robot mode. It's got a decent amount of paint on it actually, and a decent amount of details, everything from his little face to the little ray guns on his hips. He just looks so cute and kickable. Now moving on to the posability real quick. First we have a pivot at the shoulder, then we have a bend at the elbow that can kick about this far, and kick backwards about this far. We also have a pivot at the hind legs, as well as one on the hind elbow. And lastly, we have a pivot at the head.
Size comparisons, Bumblebee, Red Alert, Optimus Prime, Dead End.
Now coming back to the second cassette, Buzzsaw, let's address the yellow bird in the room. Why Buzzsaw and not Laserbeak? Without a doubt the most iconic cassette tape. Simple answer, exclusivity. If you want the Laserbeak, you're gonna have to get the Netflix Soundwave. Sucks, but, you know, it is what it is. As much as I like the classic Laserbeak colors, I gotta admit, I actually don't mind Buzzsaw. He looks pretty alright overall. Does the job really well. And if we look underneath of him, we can see his little dongle. And yet again, not covered in the instructions, this is actually meant for any of the ports on Soundwave. There are also these little divots on his arm where you can do the more traditional perched on his arm look. However, I wouldn't recommend it. It's an extremely tight fit. But moving on to the posability. First, we have a pivot at the head, then one at the base of the neck. Each leg gets one pivot, and lastly, each wing.
Size comparisons, Bumblebee, Red Alert, Optimus Prime, Dead End.
Now we come to the MVP of not only the cassettes, but kind of the whole package, honestly. However, before I continue any further, he's not fully done just yet. We just need to plug these little things into his back here. There we go, now he looks more complete. And without a doubt, Rumble feels the best to handle, it looks the best, and it just feels the most complete, almost as if it was sold as its own figure. Oh wait, yeah, actually he's a repaint of a Studio Series release, so that's cool I guess. Now, while I do prefer the darker colors they chose here, I gotta admit there's one thing I don't really like about this one. The shade of purple they chose for his chest is almost the exact same shade as his Decepticon logo, so it's really hard to see. Minor nitpick, but worth pointing out. Now moving on to his posability. First, he has a ball joint at his head, which allows him to look side to side, and up this high, and down this high. He can extend his arm, and actually bring it even further up. Arms on a ball joint, and he can do a full 360, but it is impeded by his back. He has a pivot at his hand.
Man up! Give him a good punch!
And just like his daddy, he's got a wonderful spread. Really good bend at the knee, and a toe bend. Now as it stands, he's already a really good figure. However, they don't call him Rumble for nothing. First, extend the arm, fold in the hand, turn over the arm, and now plug in one of his jackhammers. Repeat this for the other arm, and now we have Rumble. I gotta say, he looks great with the pistons. And he just has a presence to him that blows the other two cassettes out of the water, and even starts challenging the Soundwave itself.
Size comparisons, Bumblebee, Red Alert, Optimus Prime, Dead End.
Although each figure's pretty alright by themselves, it really all becomes a complete package when we bring them all together. And it's when we bring them all together, you can really feel that Soundwave just appreciates his tapes. And speaking of which, to that one person that subscribed from my last video,
I appreciate that.
Now for the point of this bloated review. Would I recommend this figure? If you don't have a Soundwave and you're really itching to have one, or you really like the aesthetic of this one, sure, but honestly, I would recommend just waiting for the inevitable Studio Series 86 release. Now everyone, pull out your copy of Are You Shitting Me? 1004 Facts That'll Scare the Crap Out of You, and turn to page 116. Fact 411. Early Egyptians used tampons made of wool dipped in honey and acacia to prevent pregnancies. Fermented acacia contains an ingredient used in modern spermicides.